Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's great to see you today, and welcome to Leaders on the Frontier Live. We've got an incredible panel joining us today. The A-team, as they say, as the Blue Jays get pretty close to winning the World Series. We know that teams matter, and so it is on Leaders on the Frontier. We're going to talk about November 4 as we anticipate this federal government's upcoming budget, as well as we take a scan of our context today on October 30th, 2025, the year of our Lord. And that also relates to, well, are they brilliant trade ads or are they, frankly, trade missteps? Well, there certainly is a lot to talk about, and that includes also the outlook on our economy, as well as how do we move our country forward. We know we're in a little bit of a mess when it comes to economic concerns or declining standard of living. How do you see it? Well, we, as usual, are delighted that we not only have an incredible panel joining us, but also an incredible audience. So we're great to see a lot of people join us. It's interesting, I've got a comment here that says, as usual, thanks, David, for more great interviews. Thank you very much. We've got a lot of comments from the audience, so please keep them coming. And it's interesting, who are you rooting for in terms of this World Series, and are the Blue Jays gonna are they gonna pull it off? I do have an interesting memory as an anecdote. I was living downtown Toronto years ago when the Blue Jays won the World Series twice, and I've never seen so much toilet paper and good humor thrown out of windows in my life as 500,000 people went from what was at Front Street all the way up to Steeles Avenue, as well as across the country. So maybe history can repeat itself in some way. So it's a pretty exciting time. So we've got a lot of comments from the audience, and I wanted to just thank you for them. And I did want to highlight some. We've got a lot of comments from the audience. We get literally thousands. And this is from a very interesting interview that was just released with Dr. William Happer and Dr. Steve Koonin. I think arguably they're the top of the heap when it comes to climate scientists in the world. And that was just released this past Tuesday, and it's on a tear with lots of comments, including this one, excellent topic with an excellent panel. This needs to be shared out. Let's get back to healthy debate based on facts. Canadians need to speak up so the door on real science doesn't remain closed to both sides of an issue. Thank you very much. And I'm not quite certain what the name is there. Outstanding. I have a PhD in environmental and climate policy. This presentation is a breath of fresh air. Cancel culture makes it difficult to be a skeptic. Honesty is refreshing, and that's from Jim Warren. So thank you very much, Jim, for your kind comment, and keep them coming. We've got a lot of things happening in the news, and as people come on board, I want to just highlight a couple of them. One of which is we know that we have an interesting trend line according to Bloomberg Nanos, and this helps set the stage for our discussion today. We've got a little bit of a decline, a concern regarding confidence. If we bring up the graph about the confidence index, we can see a kind of a level there. It's on a bit of a decline, but I think that's interesting information as we look at the discussion as we anticipate a budget. We also have an interesting set of polls here that's emerged. You know, there's a kind of are they neck and neck, these parties, between the Liberals and the Conservatives, and the NDP are at 12%. What does that mean? That's according to the Nanos on the numbers. And it's also interesting that the Liberals confirmed in a Juno News article that the Liberals confirmed that they don't have enough votes to pass a budget as of now. It's a little bit of a confusing question. I mean, we'll ask our panelists what that means, because until there's a budget vote or people have been asked to fall in line and support it, we don't really know how many votes people have. But that's a question. Are we headed for an election? That's kind of an interesting possibility. Who knew? It's also interesting that in Quebec, it was decided at the court that the Bloc Québécois lost their bid to have Terrebonne election redone. And I think that was extremely close. So that was interesting. And of course, we know that in economic news, the outlook looks grim, says Macklin, the head or governor of the Bank of Canada. And it's interesting, just yesterday, I believe the bank cut the interest rate to 2.25%. So maybe that will help move us forward a little bit in the economy. There's a lot of other things going on in the world. We've heard a lot about trade talks, and we just had late yesterday confirmation that the Trump administration and Xi Jinping, the premier of China, have a trade deal easing tensions between this fierce U.S.-China rivalry as reported there. So we're going to get to trade issues in Canada in a moment, but I want to welcome an incredible panel that's joining us as we talk about a number of these issues, including the upcoming November 4 budget. And they are the dynamic Dr. Marco Navarro-Genie, the Vice President of Research at Frontier. And we also have the Honorable Dan McTeague, and he is also the head of Canadians for Affordable Energy. Great to see you, Dan. And of course, Georganne Burke, who is a Senior Vice President at the Pathway Group and an all-around great leader. And I'm just delighted to see you all. So welcome, everybody. Marco, Dan, and Georganne. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you, George. Thank you.
So I want to lead off with a question, and that is, golly, there's a November 4 budget coming up. That's the Prime Minister's first budget. We haven't had a budget for a while. And I want to ask you, Dan McTeague, what are you looking for in this budget? You've been in Parliament for a while. No longer, but you've seen a lot of budgets. How many budgets have you seen, and what are you expecting in this one?
Well, working on the Hill since 1981, active in the Liberal Party since at least 78. I would say
so a relative newcomer.
At least 25. Seen a lot of them. McKecken's budget, Lalonde's budget. Of course, Paul Martin's mini budgets, and budgets in between from the great Don Mazankowski and many others on that side. And of course, observing what's happened closely, at least since 2011, when I sort of left the scene, or it left me.
All right. Well, that's incredible. So are there key things that you're going to be looking for
Yes.
a good budget? Like we all want this government to succeed. So what are going to be the signs that this is going to be a good budget, Dan?
Well, I think yourself and Marco were on a previous show I did with you where I said that I'd heard numbers of $140 billion as a deficit. That was the time they were banding about 60 and 70. It's now 100 billion. So I think we're getting a lot closer to the shock and awe that we're going to see on Tuesday. Finally, after 10 years, Canadians who've been sort of blissfully ignoring the mismanagement of the finances of this country, the destruction of our industry, the destruction of the energy sector, the attack on consumers, allowing inflation to get through the roof, modern monetary theory, spending money we don't have, and ideas that we can simply balance the budget by not paying much attention to it, is finally going to catch up with us. And of course, those who papered on last election and decided that it was all about elbozos up may now find themselves in a very awkward position next week when governments have to not only cut back the civil servants who are too giddy to support the Mark Carney government, but now find themselves in a maelstrom, an economic maelstrom, the likes of which I'm not worried about the IMF. They're woke. They won't come in and say there's a problem with Canada's budget. I'm waiting for the bond rating agencies to do their job finally and say, hey, maybe we can't use the Canada pension plan as collateral against this massive debt and deficit. And we're going to get a credit downgrade within a week. Look for interest rates to go right back up, or the cost of borrowing to be yet another slam dunk for Canadians. Of course, we have what the Bank of Canada said yesterday. Tiff Macklin, you referred to him a little earlier. Scary what he said. He talked about getting used to the lower standard of living. Now, a lot of Canadians know that already, but for the elbozos out there, it's going to be a real problem because I think they finally recognize they've run the gamut here. They've run the country into the ground, and there's nowhere to hide.
Okay, so there you have it from Dan McTeague. There's some very important points there, so let's pay attention to, gosh, it sounds like a reckoning, Dan.
It is a reckoning. It's a reckoning, and we all took the time in the last election to go talk to people at the door. I couldn't believe the level of ignorance, blissful as it was, and the blame entirely of the past 10 years of reckless spending, of irresponsible policies, of DEI, ESG, net zero lunacy that has really hobbled Canada's economy and driven up the cost of pretty much everything, which is why I worked for Canadians for Affordable Energy for the past 7 years, left gas buddy because I saw my country going down the drain in 2018. To me, this is not just a reckoning. This is something that folks out there really wanted. And they thought, well, Mr. Carney has the creds. We've seen his handiwork in other places. It's not a great story. But I think this is going to be a bigger question, David. By this time next week, we'll now know that maybe the Liberals can't really call an election now because they haven't got a trade deal. More importantly, they're dealing with a debt, the likes of which I've never seen since 1997. Paul Martin was told by the IMF and others that we might very well come under the guidance of that agency. As I said at the beginning, the IMF is not the IMF of the 1990s. It's very much a woke organization. As long as your credentials are around net zero and other nonsensical things that are very pernicious to Canada, they're not going to get involved. In fact, they're encouraging the federal government to divide the debt in between, in between capital and, of course, the operational, which is just a nonsense argument. But I think bond rating agencies are going to be the ones I'm going to watch very closely post November 4th, right up until the 10th, because I think Canada's going for a credit downgrade, and with it, our standard of living, as Tiff Macklin has said.
Okay, wow. Thank you very much, Dan. What about you, Georganne Burke? Are there particular things that you're looking for in this budget? Do you have a crystal ball like Dan?
No, and I don't have Dan's intense, in-depth experience with budgets either. But I tend to look at things from the layperson's perspective, and maybe with a little political slant to it. And I don't mean partisan; I mean political.
Yes.
I'm really concerned about the report that I saw yesterday from the governor of the Bank of Canada. That is a very bad sign. But it was like, duh! It was a duh moment. I said, "Oh, really? That's a shock that we're in a recession." Most people have known this, maybe not use those words, but they're sure seeing it and feeling it every single day. So what the government has to understand is that people are feeling this and they have to act accordingly. They're promising, Carney has been promising to make the government more efficient, to reduce the size of government. I don't believe that for 1 second. I think there will be smoke and mirrors, magic to make it look like he's doing that, but I don't actually see it happening. There's a normal attrition rate every single year in the government, which they can say, oh, this is a reduction in the force, but those are people that would leave anyway. All I'll fall back on is in 2015, when Trudeau became prime minister, and in the ensuing 10 years, he said he was going to reduce the size of government. Today, there are 40% more public employees. He said he was going to stop with the consultants, which he did for a year or two. We're right back up to where we were in the number and dollar amounts of consultants, maybe even more than we were in 2015. So, in fact, we have a government that's 40% bigger, plus they still have all those consultants. The little factoid that I picked up on, which I think is very important and something which is going to have a long-term impact, and this budget, I don't think, can possibly address it, and it's that 22% of the Canadian workforce is employed by government. All governments, but by government. In the United States, where everyone acknowledges that there's too much government, they're at 14%.
Remarkable. Yeah.
So if people are wondering why it feels like all of our money goes to taxes, now you know why. We have to pay people that work there. So that's a big problem. In addition, we have a problem, I know we're going to talk more depth about it with trade, which is affecting the ability of Canada to actually have viable businesses here who, when they do business and when they make money, they pay taxes, which funds the government. That's going to be a problem looking forward. So I don't know how they square this circle. I don't know how they figure out how to make this work. It looks to me like a gigantic mess. And if anybody tries to say that it's Donald Trump's fault, I'm going to just point to the last 10 years and say, this is from 10 years of liberal mismanagement, starting with Trudeau and continuing on with his advisor, Mark Carney.
Okay, so that's a brilliant summation. And before I turn to Marco on his take on the budget or what he anticipates, I was curious about the most recent speech by the Prime Minister at the University of Ottawa, where he certainly articulated those phrases that, and it was to a younger audience, of anticipating sacrifice. I mean, you're a brilliant strategist, Georgine. What happened there? What was the purpose of that speech in your mind?
I, if I was his comms person, I would have said, you know what, either don't make the speech or certainly don't say that. Maybe it was sort of one of those moments when the truth slipped out. The fact is that young people, particularly, their future is being curtailed by this profligate spending, this lack of attention to the important details, this lack of concern for what are the right things to do. I don't know how young people can make any plans to ensure they have good jobs, to ensure that they can afford to own a home, have a family, and do all of the things that we all assumed, not only we, but even my kids assumed that they would have, and in fact have been able to have. But my grandchildren certainly don't feel like that. They're at that age right now. They're in their teens and 20s, and they're looking at this and they're going, wow, there is not much here for us. So I don't know why he would have said that, but I guess maybe, as I said, maybe the truth slipped out.
Yeah, very interesting point. So turning to Marco Navarro-Genie, what's your thoughts on what you anticipate in this budget?
I don't have a crystal ball either, of course, but judging from what is being said around Ottawa and some of the declarations of the Prime Minister and people from the PMO and everybody in the know, I would anticipate that the budget that we are about to see will look a lot like the budget that we've seen before. And I'll qualify that. The ideology that motivates the people in government at the moment has not changed. And we are seeing a significant number of tactics and of strategies that are very much the same as the ones we've seen before. Let me give you an example. The Prime Minister keeps talking about the difference between spending and investment. For the last sort of 10 years or 12 years or so, we have transformed the language of investment. An investment used to be something that, you put your money somewhere and it's going to grow and you're going to get some benefits out of it and what have you. Government now has appropriated that word and have conflated it with the idea of spending. And now they want to separate what spending they want to essentially convince people that their spending is an investment. And so this has a couple of differences or a couple of significant things is that by essentially moving an enormous amount of money in spending to the category of investment, they are able essentially to perform a kind of a voodoo magical spell on the economy by saying this is not really debt because it's investment. And so, but we shouldn't fall for that. And the reason why these two things connect. Just a couple of weeks ago, we heard, for example, that the MG plant in Ingersoll in Ontario is pretty much shutting down. If we move back to 2022, in December of 2022, those of you who are watching this on X can go on Twitter and find on December 5th, I think it was, of 2022, the Prime Minister of Canada tweeted and said that what a great thing that they were investing, over $500 million in transforming this plant in Ingersoll. And it was going to increase the number of jobs. There were 2,000 jobs more or less at the time. They talked about there being maybe 5,000 jobs by 2025. And that in 2025, they were going to be producing 50,000 vehicles a year. So that was in 2022. And all of this was in the future. But the future is here now. All that which they called investment is here now. So let's see what the investments have yielded. Well, there are less than 700 jobs left right now at that plant, which is about virtually to shut down. Most of its industrial capacity is moving to the United States, and so the yield of that investment is less than zero. They have not been able to produce more than 5,000 vehicles last year in 2024, which essentially means that between the government of Ontario and the government of Canada, they have subsidized that plant, and each vehicle that they produced costs you and I and everyone else who's listening, and even those who aren't listening, about $150,000 a vehicle just to produce it.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
And so this is the language of investment. This is the language of recreating the economy in this sort of made-up world of doom, that the world will come to an end unless we all drive electric vehicles. Now, so this is essentially a snapshot of what we have seen before and we're about to see, because they're using the exact same language. They're going after the exact same strategies of trying to paint a rosy picture in the future in order to spend all this money. And so going back to the language of investment and spending, they are increasing spending, but they want sort of to signal that the place is in better shape because they're spending for the future. But
Interesting.
it's all smoke and mirrors.
Well, I think that's a brilliant summation, Marco. And it's interesting because it sounds like we have a government that really believes they're at the center. It's almost like a profound practical and philosophical decision. They believe that they as a government are at the center of wealth creation, in the sense that they're talking about language, as you said, investment. Is this a kind of a different type of government assumption? I mean, I always thought that government's role was to facilitate the private sector, individuals, companies, to create wealth. Is something else going on here? What are your thoughts on that, Marco?
Well, we have seen that, for some time now, the culture has been transformed. We live in a world in which whatever government says and whatever government lends its decreasing legitimacy to must be true because the government says so. And so we live in a world, as Prime Minister Trudeau talked about, we live in a postmodern world and a post-national world in which language essentially constructs the reality in which we live. We are told that a man can be a woman, that a woman can be a man, and now all of a sudden, it's no surprise that we are being told that spending is an investment. So these things are not disconnected, I guess is what I'm trying to tell you, is that whatever the government decides to say, they believe that that is what people are going to believe, and they live in this bubble of an imaginary world. What I could sort of gather from what Dan was saying, because he threw us all those sobering numbers and situations, is that 12, 15, 10 years later, we have come to a place where the reality is asserting itself. I remember there used to be that song. I don't know if you remember it. I can't even remember who sang it, but it's, I believe I can fly, right?
Oh, yes.
I believe I can touch the sky. Well, think about that, right? If you climb to the Peace Tower and throw yourself from it because you believe you can fly, there is something called gravity. That's the reality that is going to assert itself beyond your beliefs. And we have been living in a world that is essentially made up, a make-believe world. And the reality, the economic reality, the social reality, and all those other small realities are asserting themselves on this world of make-believe.
Wow, very powerful. We've got an incredible panel here, as you can see, from Georganne Burke, political strategist and consultant, Dan McTeague, president of Canadians for Affordable Energy, and of course, Dr. Marco Navarro-Genie, vice president of research at Frontier. We welcome your comments, and gosh, are you guys busy as an audience? It's interesting. Shelley Sawchuk says, Carney investments are all borrowing money and not making money. Well said. So we have an interesting conversation here as we anticipate the budget. And I guess I can't help but ask Dan McTeague and all of you, what are the odds that this budget will fail in a vote? I mean, obviously that would come up later in mid-November as it comes back for a vote with the full House. But is there a chance that we could be, well, experiencing an election? Is that a possibility, Dan, do you think?
Well, as we mused before this, Georganne and I, and Marco may have probably agreed with this. I think it's quite likely you're going to have an election, and I say that because the Liberals have been preparing for an election.
Pardon me? What did you just say, Dan? Can you please
Liberals
repeat
have
that
been preparing
before
for
my
an
ears
election
fall off?
quietly. Sorry. Well, the Liberals have been preparing for an election for some time, regardless of the numbers. They've got no game. Look, the bigger picture here is that they failed on getting a deal with Trump. The economy is failing right in front of them. Their EV mandates, their climate policies, their net zero policies are failing right in front of them. Their migration gambit is failing. Household purchases and household worry and debt, as well as the ability to get people housed, is falling to pieces. Food banks are lining 2.2 million people every month, 2.2 million Canadians every month. That which we know, there isn't really a lot of good coming out of this. And so I think the Liberals have to run for the bushes rather than being devoured by the wolves of reality. And I think that's because the NDP really is either going to not show up, which is, in my view, what they might do to avert an election they can't afford. They've been playing this game for quite some time, where they would say they're going to vote against the government. Then, of course, they propped up the government only to lose most of their seats in the last election. So the Liberals, 167, maybe 168. And if the NDP doesn't show up, then it'll be 166, 165 for the combined opposition. I just want to make something very clear to the viewers here, David. It is the tradition of the opposition party to vote against the budget. Now, there may be the greatest budget since the 1860s, but the reality is that that's the role of the Conservative Party in this case, as it was our role when we were opposition. We always vote against the budget. What the other parties do here, it looks like the Green is not going to go along with it. The Bloc certainly isn't going to go along with it, given what happened in Terrebonne last night on the decision not to have a by-election. So that leaves us down to 7. Do the 7 NDP members suddenly find their exits to the washrooms? I don't know. But if they don't, and they show up and they vote against the budget, we are into an election beginning anywhere between the 18th or 19th of November for Christmas.
All right. So what do you say, Georganne Burke? What's your prediction? Is that a possibility, a risk?
Oh, I think it's a very high risk, very high possibility. So it really depends on whether or not Mark Carney and company get themselves out of their bubble where they think that everything is just rosy and wonderful, and recognize that things are not so great, and act accordingly. But I think that they actually believe that they could have an election, win a majority. I think that's what they believe. I don't know what the NDP is going to do. I know they don't want to support this budget because for a couple of reasons, but the main one being that their own supporters don't support the budget. They don't like what they know is coming down. They know it's going to be, he's even said it's going to be an austerity budget. That's driving NDP support away. There are things that he is going to do that are going to really annoy and anger the NDP to the point where they won't be able to vote. The Bloc Québécois has come in with their massive list of demands, probably most of which will be denied. And I think that and we know that the Conservatives are going to vote against this budget because they know it will be nothing remotely resembling a budget that they could tolerate. Even if he does a couple of things that look like he's mimicking Pierre Poilievre's policies, it will not be enough to bring the Conservatives around. So there is a chance there could be an election. It would be a Christmas election. The question, of course, is who will the voters blame for that? Okay. We don't know. It depends on who gets out there first and tells the story, sets the narrative, sets the tone. And I'm certainly hoping that the Conservatives will do it. I don't know that I have any faith that they will, but if we leave it to the Liberals, they'll make it look like all those other guys over there, they're the reason that we're ruining your Christmas for you. So I think it's entirely possible. I have been hearing this, by the way, for more than just this past week. I've heard it weeks ago. Someone came to me and said that Elections Canada was asked to find voting locations and get them lined up. And this was at least 2 months ago. So,
Georganne, can you just clarify that? So from your intelligence, you understand that Elections Canada has been asked to prep up for an election.
Yep. They have been. They've been told to get voting locations set up. And this was not a week ago. This was weeks ago, as much as 2 months ago. And I kind of went, at the time I went, really? I was kind of surprised.
Mhm.
And now as I see things moving along, I think it's entirely possible that they were told to do this, and for a reason.
Wow. Okay, so there you have another key point of information here. It looks like there's a good possibility of an election. Marco, would you be on that page as well, that assessment?
I don't know that I have a lot to add to what has been so well described here. I'm still shaking my head because the reality is, the Liberals could govern. They have been governing like they have a majority.
That's right.
And so they really don't need to precipitate an election, except for the fact of what we just described, that all the things that they came to fix, it's not just that they haven't fixed them because no one expects them to fix them overnight, but they haven't even made a dent on it. And what is worse, what is more, is that things have gotten worse. I mean, I don't think anyone believes the dictum that the day that he became prime minister, every Canadian, the life of every Canadian improved. That's what the prime minister said. You have to live in a separate reality to believe that. So I guess quoting the Cheers crowd in the TV series, you gotta wonder what color the sky is in the prime minister's world when he says that. But the reality is this: the liberals have been clever enough to understand when they have run out of runway. And I think they know that they have run out of runway. And wouldn't it be great now that they have run out of runway to give the aircraft to the Conservatives? There you go.
This is a very interesting time in our nation's history. And I look at this both historically and from a policy point of view. I think Canada is in serious trouble. Not to point out the obvious. I mean, we look at the economics, we look at the trade relationships, the desperate need to reset security and our security relationships vis-a-vis NATO. And we know that if we don't do this, we don't have trade. I mean, the Americans put a premium on reliable, secure partnerships. And so we've got to get with the program. So we have got all kinds of opportunity to be the most prosperous free nation in the world. And so I'm hoping that this budget would be a definitive signal that the last kind of frankly wasted decade of economic stagnation, you can describe it in other terms, that this would be a new day, that there'd be an opportunity to put aside that dysfunctional policies like tanker bans on the West Coast to all kinds of legislation that is not helping this country move forward would be left behind. So we will see what happens on November 4, but I just see an urgency to move this country forward. And I guess, golly, maybe I'm a little bit naive here, but I just think that we really need to get on with building this country. So I just think having an election would be frankly a waste of time. Maybe it's an opportunity to get the country back on track. I mean, that's the argument. But Dan, am I being naive here? What's going on?
No, David, there's one point that I think we haven't looked at. That's not to be speculative, but Mark Carney could lose that vote on confidence, which the budget is. There'd be no election. The other parties, as unlikely as it sounds, could likely come together and support Pierre Poilievre and make him prime minister without going to an election. I think that would be the Canadian way, but nothing surprises me anymore. The shock of what people are going to see on November 4th will have them both upset as to how bad things really are, despite the glossing over and trying to put the proverbial lipstick on a pig, or trying to make, we express it in the past, making a silk purse out of a sow's ear, which is what the Liberals have to do. But at the end of this, they lose the vote in the House of Commons. It isn't immediately an election. There could be a move by the leaders of the party, the Bloc in particular, but also with the NDP saying, we've got nothing loose. Remember, the NDP, their enemy is not the Conservative Party. It's actually the Liberals. That's where they lost their votes. And so I think there might be, and you heard it here first, more than just a shock of the deficit, the amount, that we could be looking at a situation where you have a coalition minority government, at least for the next several months.
Oh my gosh.
We don't want another election.
That's right. So in our parliamentary system, recall that we need the confidence of the House, e.g. the numbers have to add up for a majority. So that's true, Dan. Technically, we could avoid an election. We could just have the parties coalesce in terms of a coalition government or some other number. So yeah, very good point. Comment here from the audience. This is my perspective too, says to build this country, we really need production to produce our resources and more. Well said. We've got so many ace cards, and natural resources are a key one. And speaking of which, when we talk about the economy and ace cards, I want to bring up the topic of trade. It's been in the news, you may have noticed. There's been some ads featuring the late Ronald Reagan and claims about his use of tariffs or desire for free trade. I mean, that's a whole nother topic. But obviously, Reagan was a free trader, but he also used tariffs. And you could still argue that Donald Trump is a fan of free trade, but also fair trade and is prepared to use tariffs. So was the ad campaign that the Ontario government under Premier Doug Ford a good idea? And I know that the claims are the Prime Minister even saw the ads as well. But were they a good ideas? Because, I mean, the last time I checked the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, the whole idea of going into U.S. politics was a pretty gutsy move, or was it kind of silly? Georganne, do you want to dive on that one?
Oh, yes. Now you're in my territory.
Okay.
From not just the political perspective, but I can speak as an American also. I will tell you that this showed to me a complete misunderstanding of the American population, including Republicans, including Reagan Republicans. Nobody in the United States, the way I described it to someone the other day is that Canadians wake up every morning and wonder what's going on in the U.S. What is the U.S. doing today? What is the bad man orange doing today? You know, all the questions that they ask. It's really true. Americans wake up, and believe me, Canada isn't the first, second, third, or 55th thing on their mind. When they think of Canada, is around Stanley Cup hockey time, and only if there's a U.S. team in. And of course, right now, with the Jays playing the Dodgers, they're thinking about Canada a little bit too, and not necessarily in a real favorable way. By the way I get out of it is I tell people I'm a New York Yankees fan, leave me alone.
Yay!
That's how I deal with it. But I think that the ad was a very poor judgment. It was a gigantic waste of $75 million of taxpayer money in a time when we can ill afford to spend money on such things. They completely misjudged the response of the American people. Doug Ford says, well, now Americans are paying attention to us. Yeah, but you can pay attention in good ways and bad ways. And I wouldn't say that this got the good ways. In addition to which, they enraged the president and he slapped another tariff on. He uses tariffs exactly the same way that Ronald Reagan did, which is to change bad behavior. The problem, of course, that Donald Trump is facing today is there is way more bad behavior in trade than there was 40 years ago. That's the difference. Donald Trump is dealing with a completely different economic environment, a completely different trade environment, different enemies. I don't think China was viewed at that time as the enemy that it is today, the trade enemy, let alone the security enemy.
Indeed.
And so they completely misunderstood. I think Canadians have completely misunderstood what's going on in the U.S. And Ford made a huge mistake, I believe, putting that ad out. I think it will backfire ultimately in a way even that we haven't seen yet.
All right. Wow. Marco, your quick response on that one?
I think intentions are never the best way to judge things, but the outcome. I asked myself, what was the objective of those ads? And the Premier Ford pretty much came out and suggested what the objective was. When somebody said that he had succeeded in annoying, I think they used a different language, the President of the United States, and he said, well, then that was the purpose, right? And so if the purpose of the ads was to annoy Donald Trump, okay, hooray, they succeeded. But what is the point for a premier of a province to annoy the president of the neighbor who has this enormous trade with his province, and let alone with the rest of the country. So it's really completely out of bounds and not the business of an elected official to go around annoying heads of state in neighboring countries. Completely irrational.
Well said. What about you, Dan? What's your take on these ads?
I think Georganne spoke very well to this, and I think it's very clear that what Doug Ford did was a major disaster. Now, I have just two small points. I've known Doug Ford since virtually he was a baby. He was my neighbor at our parents' cottage up in Ennismore, Ontario. So I knew a young Dougie, and this is seems to be out of character with the kid that I knew growing up. That's a long time ago, and that's not to mean to be disparaging. But if you're going to engage in brinkmanship, which is what this is, there has to be what we call a symmetry, that you have equal power and equal pull. We don't. Yeah. We're going to get the snot kicked out of us here. And why not? I think a lot of this has to do with the fact that maybe Mr. Ford himself and Carney, who apparently saw the video, didn't see the same video I saw about what Ronald Reagan has said in its entirety. I know a little bit about that because, as you know, as public relations for Toyota Canada, around the time in the late 80s, early 90s, guess what we had just built? Not one, but we're planning a second plant to build in Ontario. And why did we do that? Because of what Reagan said. He said, if you don't, back off with your dumping of these Japanese vehicles, that was the enemy at the time on an economic perspective.
That's right.
And we will demand that you put in voluntary restraints on your vehicles. How we got around that, that's the company Toyota and Team MC, was to simply build in Canada, get to the United States. So he didn't want to use tariffs, but he was certainly prepared to use them. In this case, whether it was semiconductors or whether it was cars or whatever the case you may have, context is important. Thank God I have the gray hair and I was around at the time to prove that maybe Doug should have spent a lot more time working in this industry as opposed to punching around meat at Canada Packers back in the 80s.
Okay. Well, great discussion. I'm just marvel at the ads. I'm also fascinated by the U.S. ambassador's response, which was pretty direct here. And I think that's a very concerning signal. If we could share that clip.
I don't know how we get this back on track.
That comment after Ambassador Pete Hoekstra had a conversation with Donald Trump on Saturday, the same day the U.S. president threatened an additional 10% tariff on Canadian products.
He didn't give me any, clear indication or any indication at all that he was in any hurry to get back to the negotiating table and get an agreement.
While criticizing how Canadian media framed the recent breakdown of trade talks, the ambassador said Ontario's anti-tariff ad and comments by other premiers was akin to meddling in American affairs.
Doug Ford and EB were starting to play in domestic American politics, potentially affecting a Supreme Court decision, potentially affecting politics, an election that is 8 days out, and for sure having an impact in the midterm elections.
Hoekstra admits American businesses are grappling with the uncertainty caused by the strained trading relationship between Canada and the U.S. But after the contentious commercial, the U.S. is taking no blame for the current state of the relationship.
Canada burnt the bridges with America. Donald Trump did not slam the door. Canada slammed that door shut all by itself.
So that's some pretty blunt language when you talk about burning the bridges of relationships, and, very concerning, because I would say that's one of our other ace cards, quite frankly, is that luck would have it, we have the neighbor to the south of the United States, and we can work together to create great prosperity as we have in the past. And I get it that we need to also be very clear-eyed about our own Canadian national interests and govern accordingly. But I think we really we don't do ourselves any favors by shooting ourselves in the foot, so to speak, by kind of alienating these relationships. So that's very concerning. And I look at this and I say, well, how do we get things back on track when it comes to trade? Donald Trump has certainly signaled that there's no hurry now to talk to Canada, despite him moving around the world and sealing all kinds of trade deals, including China yesterday. where does this leave Canada? And how do we move this forward? Because ultimately, this says to us that we've got a bunch of leaders in charge that don't quite understand the American relationship. Am I reading this fairly, Georganne?
Yeah, so I was hoping that I could jump in here. Actually, this trade thing is very worrying for Canada's future. I believe that what is going to happen is there will be no CUSMA in 2026.
There'll be no
there will be
CUSMA,
no
which is the North American Free Trade Agreement. Yeah,
the old NAFTA, there won't happen. Trump is just going to walk away from it. He's going to make a bilateral deal with Mexico. That's already in the works. She was very smart, Claudia Sheinbaum. She actually told Carney when he went down there and announced before he went that he was going to go talk to her about a bilateral deal. She said, no, we're not interested in that. Very smart. Okay. So Trump got a signal from her right away that she wasn't going to do that. So I believe he will make a bilateral deal with her. And then Canada is out in the cold. No matter how many times people say U.S. needs what Canada's got, he just cut a deal for rare earth metals. He cut all kinds of deals, in the Far East with friendlier countries. He cut deals with China. Okay. Before Mark Carney got to see Xi, what's left for him? Slim pickings over there. As somebody said this morning, the only thing that Mark Carney is going to come back from China with is orders. Okay. That's pretty devastating to hear that from people. That's how they view him, that he is not on Canada's side in this. So I think that we have a situation that is very dire for Canada. They made mistake after mistake. People can say all the mean things they want about Donald Trump. They can say it all they want. It doesn't matter. He is the president of the United States. He has the powers of the president of the United States. He's in charge of the trade deals. They need to play the game, whether they like it or not, and they haven't done it. He was going to be the guy that was going to be able to manage Trump. And what's happened is it hasn't been elbows up. It's, thanks, Dan, great thing, elbows up. That's the way it look right now, like a bunch of elbozos. And I know there is definitely buyer's remorse out there among the voters. People that I know that voted for him the last time, oh, well, he's going to handle Trump and blah, blah, blah. They're like, wow, what a mess. I've heard this now from multiple people. I have my bellwethers that I talk to out there that are from different parties or no parties. And what I'm hearing is they're not happy with the situation and they're terrified because of the economy.
Okay. Wow. Well said. Shelley Sawchuk says Trump is not Canada's problem. Carney is Canada's problem.
100.
So that's a very interesting take, or those policies. I mean, I think we've discussed this a number of times together over the last, some time, is that Canada needs to get its house in order. We don't even have free trade within this country, let alone, we getting our regulations under control. We should be a magnet for business instead of we're losing a lot of money as it leaves the country. So this is very concerning. I would agree with you, Georganne. And so Dan, looking to your perspective, what is it going to take to get this country back on track? What do we need to do to give people hope? I'm not trying to sound so dire here, but you've got any clear-eyed assessment here. Even the governor of the Bank of Canada says that we've got a grim forecast. So how do we turn this ship around?
Well, it's not going to be done overnight, but let's understand what we have to get rid of is this idea that we can somehow stifle our resources, prevent our energy for resources from getting to world markets that absolutely want them and they're lining up for them, kill our industry, kill our manufacturing, hurt farmers by going down this woke road of that you can build an ESG battery fantasy with billions of dollars of money. Get rid of the idea that you can somehow, tell people who want to invest in mining, critical mining. And maybe it's a message to my friend Doug Ford. You ain't going to get a mine built when it takes 15 years to get approvals to be done, let alone a road that costs a lot of money. And let's get back to where we were pre-2015, because it's not 2015 anymore, to use a Trudeauism. But the biggest vulnerability that was exposed is when Trudeau last January, had to go down to Mar-a-Lago, and he basically cried on Donald Trump's lap saying, if you put these tariffs, you will hurt Canada. We can't survive without you. Talk about a weak position, but a position made even weaker by the fact that Liberals endorsed and their followers, their supporters, for a fourth time, supported policies that were pernicious and undermined Canada. I can tell you right now, the one who won in this, Alberta's Premier Danielle Smith. Why? Because she told the Americans, we have heavy oil. You can't run your economy without our heavy oil. You don't have diesel to run your ag. You don't have diesel to run your military. You don't have diesel to run your jets or anything of the transport sector. By saying that Canada actually had a little bit of something that the Americans desperately needed, I think Trump realized very quickly that's not an area that he wants to tariff heavily. And if he does so, it could have a boomerang effect. Imagine if Canada hadn't spent the past 10 years elbows up blocking pipelines, preventing our oil and natural gas from getting to the rest of the world. Instead, letting the Venezuelans, the Russias, and the Irans, and the Iraqs, make a determination as to how to throttle us. You want to get to the Americans? Offer them what we always have had, our energy resources, and get them in the market. Anybody who stands in the way, if I were Prime Minister, those people will be put in jail overnight and then put aside because they are destroying the public greater general interest by advocating policies that are extraordinarily damaging the country. It's all coming together. And on Tuesday, Canadians are going to get a good dose of what ignorance does. And maybe a generation much dumber than its parents, I don't know. But I can tell you, Tuesday is going to be a night that we are going to remember for a very, very long time.
Okay, so let's pay attention to Tuesday. And speaking of trade deals between the United States and China, it's fascinating. I don't know if you noticed this, but a significant part of that trade deal not only had to deal with getting rid of the trafficking of precursors for fentanyl, which is a huge issue not only in the United States but in this country, Canada, but also the purchasing immediately of soybeans as a massive contract for the Americans. But thirdly, the introduction of a massive energy deal where the Chinese will be buying American energy. And I look at this, I shake my head, and I look at the proximity of Canada to China across those Asian routes, and I think it could have been us. It should be us. I know that we're moving some energy to China, but this is an opportunity for us if we just get our act together. So I want to turn to you, Marco, because I know you have a lot of background and expertise in this. And I want to bring up the phrase, the notwithstanding clause, because I find it very interesting, because if we think about getting this country moving again, we got to get our confederation moving again. And it's fascinating that this week we see the teachers' strike coming to a head in Alberta. And we notice that the notwithstanding clause has been used now to get people back to work. And meanwhile, we have a federal government that its desire and object is to take the notwithstanding clause away. So can you help us understand the significance of the notwithstanding clause and that kind of, how do I say, irritation does to the federal-provincial relationships yet again, and the need to get this country moving again economically and in every way?
How many hours do we have? The notwithstanding clause, first of all, is a constitutional mechanism. It is Section 33 of the Charter of Rights, and therefore is part of the Charter. People need to understand that. It was designed to ensure the fundamentals of democratic rights for a majority of those who elect people, so that minorities could not run the place. Basically, that's how it works. And so the clause can be invoked in order to set aside decisions of courts that are unpopular or that are just way out there. How many of us have seen decisions of the court that makes us shake our heads and go, how is it possible that a court suddenly hands the property rights of all these people in the Fraser Valley to Aboriginal Indians on the basis of their say-so, basically, right? The notwithstanding clause, Section 33, would allow the legislature of BC, for example, to set that judgment aside. And so it was essentially created as an escape valve for constitutional mistakes or judicial mistakes and that sort of thing. It's not something that was cooked up or is used, in the back rooms and whatnot. What is more, it is also set up in a way that is responsive to the needs of people because it's not used uh, as a blanket. It has to be very well defined. It has a sunset clause of 5 years. And if it ever wants to be continued, there needs to be another vote, and it's out in the open, it is debated, et cetera, et cetera. So the last point that I would like to make is that it is the brainchild of two Western premiers, Premier Blakeney and Premier Lougheed of Saskatchewan and Alberta. And their point was that without the notwithstanding clause, without the ability of the provinces to withhold the homogenizing tendencies of Ottawa, of the federal government, the idiosyncrasies and the culture and the things that make the Canadian variety could be erased by Ottawa. And so it was also a mechanism to try to stop those homogenizing tendencies that come from the federal government.
Well, what a brilliant summation. So the notwithstanding clause is critical. So I'm going to quickly ask Dan McTeague, why is this federal government, and I want to ask Georganne the question as well, why is this government, when we need to work together with the provincial level, pushing that agenda? Why would they want to get rid of it?
Well, it's not the same Liberal Party that brought it in place. In 1982, I was there on Parliament Hill when my boss, Paula Cosgrove, along with Tom Pitfield and Prime Minister Trudeau, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, Her Majesty, the Queen Elizabeth at the time, and of course, other dignitaries were there to sign what had been not the perfect document, but a document that has been pretty much binding, whether provinces like Quebec signed it or not, it is nevertheless binding on the Federation. And the safety valve that my good old professor from my days at the University of Toronto, Peter Russell, referred to, he's a constitutional expert.
That's right.
And yes, I've read Peter Hogg over and over again about the notwithstanding clause. I was there and I understand full well this is how you balance a federation. And I think what Dr. Marco Navarro-Genie has suggested is actually quite accurate. This is bulletproof. It has gone through the acid test. Its use is legitimate, but the attempt, good luck trying to get rid of the amending formula is extraordinarily difficult to get rid of. All it takes is Alberta or PEI or some person in, as we saw in many, many years ago, it's Elijah Harper in one particular legislature lifting up the feather and saying no, and the whole thing comes crashing down. So I think but it does suggest the Liberal ideology is that they don't tolerate any deviation from their agenda and from what they consider to be woke. For the Justice Minister, same guy that ruined immigration, ruined the housing sector, is now about to bulldoze our Constitution. I think it's time for these phonies to pack up and go, and hopefully that'll happen the next couple of weeks.
Is that your take too, Georganne Burke?
Well, I like Dan's last comment. That was perfect. The fact is that this is, to really summarize it, it's all about control. This Liberal government is not, this isn't the Liberals of Dan's days. When Dan was in the House of Commons, I used to get mad at Dan when he'd get up and say stuff, but that was the normal toing and froing of partisan politics. Now we're talking about something totally different. We're talking about a party that is looking for China-like control over everything in our lives. What we drive, if we drive, what we live in, if we own it or if we don't, what we eat. If they say we can't eat X, we shouldn't be eating X. I mean, this is how far they're willing to go. The notwithstanding clause was the one thing that gave provinces the ability to get out of something they felt was really wrong for them and to be able to operate in their own way. And to try to get rid of it, well, I don't think, I agree with Dan and Marco both, I think, has both said this would be very difficult to get rid of. They can say what they want. Our problem is that I have a feeling that with the education system that we have in this country, very few people understand how important the notwithstanding clause is. And it's taken a lot of slings and arrows over the years. There's been a lot of misinformation about what it is and what it does and why we have it. So people who don't want to see anything happen oops by mistake to the notwithstanding clause need to get out and make sure people are educated about why it's there and how it protects the rights of provinces and the people that live in those provinces.
One more thing to add to that is that way at the beginning of the patriation of the Constitution, immediately radical minorities identify the courts as the way to move their political agenda. And so they have these radicals have identified and are clear that the one stumbling block, the one obstacle to their grand designs to change everything is the notwithstanding clause. And so that is, in fact, the reason, the greatest reason why they're trying to get rid of it.
Well, let's pay attention, my fellow citizens, to what is going on here as we anticipate Tuesday. Our panel has certainly weighed in brilliantly on a lot of key points. I think we've heard a lot of insights in terms of the significance of this day and this time. And so my final question to all of you, because I've really been impressed by the speed and veracity of these questions coming in from the audience, is what can citizens do here? Like, I mean, I know this is a concerning time for our country. There's lots of solutions that we've talked about to get this country moving again. But surely a key question when it comes to the future of this country is the role of the citizen. Any quick words of advice there for us and our audience as we look to the future, the role of citizens? Dan, do you want to take that one first?
I've stood on the sidelines for the past several years. I didn't get involved in elections. I made a lot of comments about where I thought policies were going, but I found myself no longer being able to do that. That's why I supported the Conservative platform and Conservative party in the last federal election. I will do so again if another election is given. But I think this is last chance saloon for Canada. And I don't say that with with pride. I say it with a very heavy heart. The amount of people and young people leaving this country, investment leaving this country, talent leaving this country, is an abject example of just how bad the policies and the ideology which underpin them have become. And I think Canada needs to make a quick turn. If Canadians can't do it by getting involved and going to the polls and doing the right thing after 4 critical mistakes, I'm not sure what is going to convince Canadians of what's left for this country, because at this stage, it isn't that we can win the World Series, which we all want. It's far more serious. It's about the future of this country, the destiny of this country, which I think has never been more threatened. On the day in which we all celebrated the victory of the no forces against the we in Quebec, I think we are now looking at a new era in which the divisions from within society and our political differences are going to perhaps take Canada down as a casualty. I hope I'm wrong, but please get involved politically. And if you don't like the way things are going, there really isn't much choice. If I, as an 18-year Liberal member of Parliament, can vote Conservative and support them, so can you.
Amazing. Marco, any comment on the role of citizens?
Yes, none of what is happening has happened by coincidence. None of what is happening has fallen from the sky. It is the direct result of government policies. And that means they can be changed. And they can be changed by people, echoing Dan, getting involved. Get involved, summon the courage to get involved, and tell the truth.
Very good. Georganne?
Well, since I'm probably the grassroots organizer of this bunch over here, we have an elected official, we have an academic, and me, I'm the grassroots person. I've been pleading with Canadians as long as I've been involved in politics here, which is a very long time in this country, to please don't leave everything to the people that got elected. They're just people like you and me. They're no better, no worse. Sometimes, well, some of them are worse. Mostly they're no better. They're just like us. And they can make mistakes. They can make bad decisions. It is your job as a citizen to know who your member of parliament is, who your provincial member is, who your city councillor is, who your mayor is, who your school board trustee is. And you need to make sure that they know what you want, what you expect from government. Now it's so important. It is so crucial. I advise everybody who's listening here, and you reach out and tell 20 people that you know, find out the name of your member of parliament, call them up and say, listen, we don't like the direction things are going. Go visit them, make an appointment to go to their office. Be polite, but be firm. We don't like the direction things are going. We're very worried about where our country is at. We want to know what your proposal is to make things better. And if you can't give me an answer, I know that you're not going to get my vote the next time. I'm willing to bank on my party, which is the Conservative Party, will have answers to most of the questions that people ask. We have a leader who is a very policy-heavy guy. He talks about all the issues in his way. The Liberals talk around the issues. That's the difference, I think, the ones that I'm seeing these days. They don't have answers. It's not that they have different answers. They don't have answers at all. So you need to ask, and if they can't give you an answer, then tell them you're not going to get my vote, and I'm going to talk to all of my family and friends and people I work with and everybody who will listen to me and tell them we got to make a change. That is what they understand. The one thing that people in government want is to stay there. And the thing that you can take away from them is their right to stay there.
Well, thank you very much, Georganne Burke, Dan McTeague, and of course, Marco Navarro-Genie. This has been an outstanding conversation, and our audience certainly applauds you, and I would echo their applause for you as well. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Bye, Marco.
So we'll look to November the 4th, and we will also look to the next Blue Jays game, and go Blue Jays. But in the meantime, a word of encouragement. If we've heard the panel, it's the word that we are proud to be Canadian and we can do better, but we also want to answer the call, and that is to be involved as citizens, to speak up, to get involved. Otherwise, it's on us. So, my friends, that's it for this week on Leaders on the Frontier Live, and please join us next week in the same time and same place next Thursday. Until then, have a great week.
Thank you for watching Leaders on the Front.